Local news, national news, even feel-good news, delivering the topics that are relevant to you.
That's why I listen to Joe. He covers it all.
The Joe Kelley Show on WDBO.
Well, we have got one of two options here. One is we're going to have a very eventful next hour or two. Or two, we're not going to have a very eventful hour for the next hour or two. As we are waiting, as former President Trump had announced that he expects to be indicted this afternoon at any minute. So we got a heads up from ABC. We got a heads up from Fox News. They sent us messages saying, "Hey, we're going to have special programming coming up a little bit later today that details the possible indictments against Donald Trump." But again, we are monitoring the courthouse, and so far there is nothing. David Spunt with Fox News just filed this report.
Hi, Dana. Hi, everyone. Listen, we are waiting for some sense of news from the Department of Justice. Nothing from Special Counsel Jack Smith, who's obviously attached to the Department of Justice, waiting to get that information. But if the former president is correct and he is indicted, this would mark his third indictment, and there could possibly be a fourth indictment. That's down in Georgia. That's a state charge being run by the Fulton County prosecutor, Fani Willis. She's gone on the record, Dana, and everyone at the table multiple times, in fact, giving a television interview recently saying that her office is ready to go. That's an investigation relating to the conversation that the former president had on the phone, on tape, with Brad Raffensperger, the Georgia Secretary of State, shortly after the election, saying that he needed Raffensperger to find some 11,000 votes. So we're looking to see what happens here with Jack Smith, to see if the former president is indeed indicted, as he says. And we're also looking to see what happens in Georgia in the next few weeks. Willis has gone on the record to say that everything would be done, whatever everything means, by September 4th. So right now we watch and we wait. But clearly there is news brewing on both fronts. Dana?
Yep, we're keeping a close eye on that, and we're going to monitor this, and we'll bring you the latest if there are new developments. But as you heard there from Fox's David Spunt, Donald Trump may be facing his third and fourth indictments. At what point is there a point at which you say enough is enough? I can't do this anymore. And I'll be the first to tell you that I believe that Donald Trump in his first term in office absolutely got an unfair deal. He got absolutely railroaded when during his first term. So much of Donald Trump's first term was distracted by this 100% bogus Russian dossier. This Russian collusion accusation. I mean, that entire investigation and impeachment was made out of whole cloth. It was absolutely made up. There was no hint of truth to it. There was no element of truth to it. It was an absolute lie. And it's a lie that the American people, many of whom still believe. I mean, there are still Americans who believe that Donald Trump colluded with the Russians to win the presidency. But there is zero evidence. There was zero evidence of that. No charges came from it. And it was absolutely a hoax. Now, what he is waiting for an indictment out of Georgia was not a hoax. He did try to overturn the elections in Georgia. He did try in that phone call to get the Georgia Registrar of Voters, the Secretary of State there, to find him more votes. Now, that's a little vague. It's a little vague when you say find me more votes. Does that mean go out and make up votes, or does that mean surely somewhere someone voted for me, figure out where those ballots are and find them? But at what point do you say, oh, my gosh, I'm exhausted, I've had enough? 844-580-WDBO. It's 844-580-9326. You can use the open mic in the WDBO app. And then, of course, the other indictment that Donald Trump says he's waiting for, that he thinks he's going to get, is an indictment out of Washington, D.C. that deals with the January 6th riots, as some call it, an insurrection. Of course, there's a whole lot of people that went to jail for that, a whole lot of people that are in jail because of that. But we are waiting for the Department of Justice's special counsel, Jack Smith. So we're keeping a close eye on Washington, D.C. right now to see if and when they make an announcement here tonight. But it does appear, at least as far as the media is concerned, the D.C. media, they are all queuing up. They are all gathering together in front of the courthouse in D.C. because they smell blood in the water. They think something is going to happen. So they are definitely queuing up for the possibility that something is going to happen in Washington, D.C. tonight when it comes to Donald Trump. Now, this has, I don't know if you guys know who Jonathan Turley is. He's a constitutional lawyer. I happen to think that I've been a fan of Jonathan Turley's for years and years, for more than a decade. This guy has been really consistent in his thought process on constitutional matters, legal matters. I've always enjoyed Jonathan Turley. And Jonathan Turley is warning that the Biden allegations are shaping up to be, in his words, one of the greatest scandals in history. This after whistleblower Devin Archer, Hunter Biden's longtime friend and business partner, gave explosive testimony before Congress on Monday. Yet, of course, the media couldn't have cared less. I've never been more disappointed in the media than I am right now. This has been a terrible disappointment. And I know that it's like looking at a mirror, right? Because we are the media. We're on the radio. We're the media. But we aren't the media that sits in Washington, D.C. We aren't the media that has headquarters out of New York City. We're Orlando-based media. And we, like you, have to rely on reporters and reporting out of Washington, D.C. to be able to get this right. And that's exactly what we're doing, is we're sitting here and waiting, just like you are, to see what we're getting out of Washington, D.C. 844-580-WDBO. It's 844-580-9326. You can use the open mic and the WDBO app. Tommy is checking in from Winter Springs. Tommy, you're on the Joe Kelley Show on WDBO. How are you?
I'm wonderful, Joe, and I hope you're feeling good again today, too, brother.
I am. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you for taking the call. Listen, you asked a very profound question. How long do you put up and wait for Trump? My truest answer is, if we hadn't found so much fraudulent corruption on the other side, we'd have a tendency to let that go sooner. But now that it's verified that, in my personal opinion, Biden is completely corrupt, you wait for Trump as long as you damn near have to, because he was right about everything. And that is my opinion, my friend. You know,
and Tommy, I got to tell you, if you would have said that 6, 8, 10 months ago, 12 months ago, I would have perhaps pushed back on you a little bit. But you and others like you who have said all along that this guy is getting robbed, y'all have been right. And Trump has been right. Now, look, I still think Trump is a terribly flawed man. But, of course, we're all flawed and broken people. But he's a flawed candidate. And he's not going to be my first choice. But I certainly understand the sentiment that you expressed, Tommy, in that. And particularly now, looking at the Bidens, and again, I get so frustrated with the media because if you only watch, your network media, you're going to think that Donald Trump is the worst human on the planet and that Joe Biden is angelic, and that the opposite is what appears to be actually true. Everything that the left has accused the right of, the left is guilty of.
Am I still on the phone? If you ever have the opportunity, Joe, read Saul Arlinsky's Rule for Radicals.
Oh, sure.
And you'll have a very good idea what's transpiring in our country right now.
You bet. Tommy, thank you so much, man. I appreciate you listening. Drive safely. I appreciate your phone call. I'm glad to see we don't have near as much rain this afternoon as we have yesterday. Yesterday, boy, it was a soaker yesterday. But we do have a couple of sea breeze storms. I'm watching the sea breezes as they come across Orange County at this hour. We do have some rain out towards DeLand, Deltona, Sanford, then all the way down to Cape Canaveral and out towards Satellite Beach. Some pretty heavy storms further south, but that is already moved on. It's already somebody else's problem. It's not our problem anymore. We just have a couple of spotty showers that we're dealing with. Again, I go back to Jonathan Turley and comments from Jonathan Turley. He says that the testimony from Devin Archer further adds damning evidence to the allegations of influence peddling, bribery, and money laundering against the Bidens. And, yesterday I had mentioned yesterday here on this show that Ron DeSantis said that for the sake of unity, that he would pardon Donald Trump if elected president. And I said, for the sake of unity, you're going to have to pardon both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, because otherwise you're only going to have unity with the Republican Party, and it's not going to be true American unity if you pardon Donald Trump but you don't pardon Joe Biden. And I got a couple of a very, very angry leftist open mics saying, "What do you mean pardon Joe Biden? Joe Biden's not guilty of anything." And I didn't air them only because of their choice use of language and the level of bitterness and anger. It's just something I don't, if you want to make a disagreeing point, by all means, you'll make it to the top of the queue. You'll be the first voice on the radio if you disagree with what I have to say. But if you're a jerk about it, then you're not. It's not going to make it. So just keep that in mind. As you're leaving comments, as you're leaving open mics. You don't have to be sweet and buttery. You don't have to kiss my tush. I don't need it, don't want it. But also, you can't be an absolute colossal jerk. Those are the rules of the show, my friends. 844-580-WDBO. It's 844-580-9326. You can use the open mic in the WDBO app. We are closely monitoring a courthouse door right now in Washington, D.C., to see if Special Counsel Jack Smith comes walking out armed with new information and new indictments against Donald Trump. Donald Trump, for his part, says that the indictment is, quote, imminent. Imminent. Tonight, this afternoon, it's going to happen. So stay with us here on WDBO.
This is WDBO 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's news and talk.
Can I mention it on the air, Paul? Is that okay?
Sure.
So Paul Cross, we were just talking in the chat room. If you ever want to join us in the chat room, you're welcome to do so. That is on the WDBO Facebook page. What the chat room is we have live cameras in our studios, and you'll be able to see Laurel and Paul Cross and me and anybody else that pops into the show. You can see the video behind the scenes, and then we've got a pretty lively group of people, a wonderful group of people in the chat room where we chit chat about all kinds of things. Man, we'll talk about great sandwiches, and we'll talk about heartbreak, and we'll talk about what we're going to have for dinner and what we had for lunch 1 and lunch 2, and then we'll talk about things that are more difficult to deal with. And regrettably, today we're dealing with one of those things that is slightly more difficult to deal with. In that, Paul, you had to put down one of your pets today.
Yeah, it was the last pet that we had remaining. That we are going to get. I see the chat here filling up as well. Yes, we're going to consider getting another cat. We just don't like to flop it out immediately. But
yeah,
this 18 years old, very much a support animal from our daughter, and it was really rough. Today was really rough. But thank you very much for all your kind words. Appreciate it.
And I'm just so sorry that they're truly. Well, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say there's nothing worse in the world. There are worse things in the world. But that is one of the toughest things to do is to and it's not just that you've lost a pet, but that you have to make a decision to end that pet's life. And
that was the biggest thing.
Hard.
We had to weigh a lot of whether or not we were keeping the cat alive for her sake or for ours. And that's where we have to think about the humane thing to do. And we've had 3 consultations with the doctors before we did this. So It was very well thought out, and it's always sad. It's always very sad. But
I'm so sorry, man. That is tough. I'm sorry for your whole family.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I will let you borrow Kitty George Washington if
I
that helps
would
at all.
love that, but I may not give her back. So
you'd have to give her, because you would have so much fur in your house that it would be unbearable how much fur you would have there in your house.
Well, just since I work at home, our cat, has been on the radio a lot. Just by me talking, and you hear meow in the background. It's like, okay, there's another radio shout out from my cat. So
it's always comforting to hear the cat meow on the radio. I remember when I was working from home, I remember it very, very well. It's 5:26. I do want to get to the stories you missed while you're at work today. That's our segment here at this time every day. These are the stories that you missed, the headlines you missed while you were at work, while you were down in the factory floor, as you were out in your cubicle farm or maybe your real farm, whatever it is you're doing today. If you're a 9-to-5er, here's what you missed while you're at work today. CNN first had the report. U.S. jobs openings in June fell to the lowest level in over 2 years. That according to new federal labor department data. This is interesting. The PGA Tour, according to the New York Times, the PGA Tour will add Tiger Woods to its board after a player rebellion over the tour's deal with Saudi Arabia's wealth fund. Players now outnumber independent directors, giving them the final say in the tour's plan. Imagine that, giving the power to the players rather than simple board members who are golf enthusiasts and or millionaires and billionaires. Out of New Jersey, the lieutenant governor, who was the first black woman to hold a statewide office in New Jersey, her name is Sheila Oliver. She died today at the age of 71. She was hospitalized for an undisclosed medical issue. In Fox News, body of a missing Goldman Sachs employee has been found. Little other details have been released about that. From the Associated Press, a former Republican Attorney General candidate and another supporter of Donald Trump have been criminally charged in Michigan in connection with voting machine tampering after the 2020 election, according to court records. It is so interesting to note that as it has been the Trump campaign, the Trump administration that has complained the loudest about fraudulent voting. And yet when it comes to convictions, we have seen more and more Republicans get convicted of tampering with elections. The New York Post has a story that the Mets have traded Justin Verlander to the Astros. Am I wrong in remembering this? And perhaps Paul Cross, you remember this. And everybody, please keep in mind, I lack the sports gene, so my curiosity about Justin Verlander has nothing to do with sports. Is he not married to Kate Upton? Is that the guy that's married to Kate Upton, the supermodel? Hang on, can you turn on Paul, please? What was
the poor son of a bee is married to Kate Upton?
He is married to Kate Upton. That's what I thought. Yeah. So there you have it. And then a sheriff's helicopter has crashed in Charleston, South Carolina. And finally, Donald Trump said in a post on Truth Social that he expects Jack Smith is going to be putting out an indictment at 5 o'clock Eastern today. It is now 5:29 Eastern, and we have not yet heard from Jack Smith. We are monitoring the courthouse in D.C., and we'll give you the latest as it happens here on WDBO.
This is WDBO 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's news and talk. Insightful.
You tell the truth from your point of view.
Entertaining.
Man, that guy is a lot taller than he sounds on the radio.
And engaging.
When we hear you on the radio, it's a good thing.
The Joe Kelley Show on WDBO.
We are following breaking news this afternoon. Donald Trump was right. Donald Trump said he was going to be indicted this afternoon, and he has been indicted this afternoon. Donald Trump indicted on 4 counts tied to efforts to undermine the 2020 election, including conspiracy to defraud the United States. That is a very serious charge. He's been charged now by the Justice Department for his efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. A frantic but ultimately failed endeavor that culminated in a violent riot by his supporters at the U.S. Capitol. The indictment, it's the 3rd criminal case brought against the former president as he seeks to reclaim the White House in 2024. This follows a pretty long-running federal investigation into schemes by Trump and his allies to subvert the peaceful transfer of power and keep him in office despite a decisive loss to Joe Biden. I know that there are plenty in our audience that just refuse to believe that Donald Trump lost that election, but that is not the conclusion of the federal investigators, quite clearly. The focus of the turbulent last couple of months after the November 2020 election, which Trump refused to accept the loss and spread lies that victory was stolen from him, that ultimately led to the riot at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. And here we are now with Donald Trump facing 4 indictments. There has not yet been a comment from the special prosecutor, Jack Smith. We are still waiting for that, but let's pick up live coverage here from ABC News as they dig into the indictments that have been unsealed.
You just lasered in on this notion that the former president knew that he lost the election, according to Jack Smith and federal prosecutors. That's the psychological component here, that he knew and yet continued to move forward with strategy to somehow hold on to the White House.
And David, we have to be careful until we read the specifics. But to be clear here, they're suggesting that the president of the United States, Donald Trump, in office, was using the power of the presidency to retain power, to basically block the peaceful transfer of power. This is something that Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, talked about over and over again, that they would hold anyone accountable who attempted to unlawfully block the peaceful transfer of power.
I want to bring in Dan Abrams, our chief legal analyst. Dan, when you hear these charges, 4 counts: conspiracy to defraud the United States, obstruction of an official proceeding, and deprivation of rights, the right to vote, that your vote would count. Yep. These are very serious charges.
Yeah, and now we have some detail as we read through this indictment in real time here. A conspiracy to defraud the United States by using dishonesty, fraud, and deceit to impair, obstruct, and defeat the lawful federal government function by which the results of the presidential election are collected, counted, and certified by the federal government. That is the one, the defrauding of the United States, a conspiracy to corruptly obstruct and impede the January 6th congressional proceeding at which the collected results of the presidential election are counted and certified. That is another account, a conspiracy against the right to vote and have one's vote counted. That's more of a catch-all one, where it's been used a number of times in the 20th century, which is interesting that it's about voter fraud. It's about basically saying, you know, in other cases where people were stuffing ballots, et cetera, and saying that deprived everyone else of the right to have the votes counted fairly. And that is now something that Donald Trump is being charged with in this indictment, which is one of the big picture pockets that we have to look at here.
And David, can I add one thing here? They're clearly stating that the fake electors, this attempt to bring in fake electors, was part of a plan to defraud the American public with false statements to make them think that Trump, in fact, had won when he had lost.
Pierre, I want to read this for our viewers watching this. This is the indictment, Justine, and again, you heard Dan there list briefly what these 4 counts would be after an initial readout from Pierre. But I just want to read the beginning of this speaking indictment.
If you're just joining us here on the Joe Kelley Show, we're listening to breaking news as Donald Trump has once again been indicted. Donald Trump with 4 indictments. The former president indicted over his efforts to overturn the 2020 election, which culminated in the January 6th, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. We will continue with our live coverage here coming up next on WDBO. It is now 5:42.
The Joe Kelley Show on WDBO.
Paul Cross is checking our drive here this afternoon, and how are things shaping up?
Well, the earlier crash on the Turnpike northbound has caused some heavy delays from before the Turkey Lake Service Plaza to the 408. We've also got a crash John Young Parkway northbound before the 528. This report sponsored by ExpressPros.com. Express Employment Professionals has put more than 10 million people to work in the last 40 years in all types of industries. Find your next job at ExpressPros.com. From the WDBO Triple Team Traffic Center, I'm Paul Cross.
Again, if you're just joining us, we are following major breaking news this afternoon as a federal grand jury in Washington, D.C. has indicted Donald Trump on 4 criminal charges related to his efforts to overturn the president's President Biden's 2020 election victory. There are also 6 unindicted co-conspirators. We're still learning more as we return back to our live coverage here from ABC News.
We have seen this before from Jack Smith. It's what they call, in essence, a speaking indictment means to lay out in lay terms so that the rest of us and viewers, voters across this country could, in essence, understand why Jack Smith and his team are taking this action. Carefully laid out here for people at home even to read. 45 pages. I'm not going to read it all, but I will read the very beginning. It says the defendant, Donald J. Trump, was the 45th president of the United States and a candidate for re-election in 2020. The defendant lost the 2020 presidential election. Despite having lost, Jack Smith says the defendant was determined to remain in power. So for more than 2 months following Election Day on November 3rd, 2020, the defendant spread lies that there had been outcome determinative fraud in the election and that he had actually won. These claims were false, and the defendant knew that they were false. John Carl, that is a significant part of Jack Smith's argument, and it goes to some of what the January 6th committee put before the American people, some of what you have reported, the psychology of the former president, and those in his inner circle who testified before the American people that this was a president who knew he lost.
I mean, we remember the January 6th committee was almost entirely hearing from Republicans, and many of those Republicans, people close to Donald Trump, who testified over and over again that they told him that the election was over and that he had lost. David, I had a very senior Republican in that Congress tell me just about a week or so after the election, he is a man who knows he lost, and it is hard on him. But I want to tell you, there are also 6 co-conspirators that are listed in this. They're not named, but they are described. 4 of them are lawyers. 1 of them is a Justice Department official, and another is a political consultant, all being described as helping him to implement this scheme. And this, again, this is not just about the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. This is about a coordinated, comprehensive effort led by the President of the United States to overturn an election that he knew he lost.
Let me just take this one step further, Dan, and then I'll bring it to you, because Jack Smith lays this out very carefully. I had mentioned that in this indictment, he says the defendant knew that these claims were false, but the defendant repeatedly and widely disseminated them anyway to make his knowingly false claims appear legitimate, create an intense national atmosphere of mistrust and anger, and erode public faith in the administration of the election, Dan.
David, I was just going to say, the indictment goes state by state and basically talks about exactly what Donald Trump did and said, because that's the key, right? I mean, you can make an allegation about the fake electors, right, and say these people, for example, some of them have been charged in Michigan for their conduct, but you still have to show Donald Trump's role in this, that he knew what he was doing and that he was actually taking actions in connection with this. And the indictment goes through point by point about the calls he was making, calling the leaders in Arizona, calling leaders in Michigan, et cetera. And that's the key here, is to be looking for Donald Trump himself's actions, not just the broader. We've known for a long time about the issue of these electors. The question's always been exactly what did Donald Trump do?
They said they actually make the point, though, in this indictment, and I want to add here that the defendant, Donald Trump, had a right, like every American, to speak publicly about the election and even to claim that there had been outcome determinative fraud during the election that he had won. He can claim that, they say. He's entitled to formally challenge the results of the election lawfully through appropriate means. But they go on to say, indeed, in many cases, the defendant did pursue these methods, I should say, of contesting the election results. His efforts to change the outcome in any state through recounts, audits, or legal challenges were uniformly unsuccessful. And in many cases, John, as we reported on numerous occasions, these were Republican-appointed judges who said, there's nothing here.
Most of them, some of them appointed by Trump himself. But what is significant here also is it outlines who told Trump that what he was doing and what he was saying was untrue. And it's pretty comprehensive. We've known some of this, but they go through the defendant's vice president. By the way, the role of Vice President Pence is...
If you're just joining us here on WDBO, we're following breaking news as Donald Trump has been indicted by a D.C. grand jury on 4 criminal counts of trying to overthrow the United States government. Now, Donald Trump, for his part, has been summoned to appear at 4 p.m. this Friday before a magistrate at the courthouse in Washington, D.C. So he will be, it appears as if he'll be arrested on Friday at 4 o'clock. There are some suggestions that he is in fact going to be arrested and jailed on that date. It is noteworthy that these 4 counts: conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, and conspiracy against rights. None of those charges are process charges, which is what, for the most part, Donald Trump has been facing previously. Has just been process charges. These are real charges for real crimes that they allege has been committed against the United States by our former president, Donald Trump. We will continue our live breaking news coverage of the indictment, further indictments of Donald Trump coming up straight ahead. Stay with us here on WDBO.
The Joe Kelley Show on WDBO. The Joe Kelley Show on WDBO. Breaking news to lively debates, covering the issues that matter to you.
I make it a point to listen to Joe Kelley when I need to fully understand what's happening in the news.
Now, the Joe Kelley Show on Orlando's News and Talk, WDBO.
If you're just joining us here on the Joe Kelley Show on WDBO, we are following breaking news as Donald Trump has been indicted once again. His initial court appearance in this case is going to be set for Friday. He's been indicted in connection with the January 6th efforts to overturn the 2020 election. And not January 6th was the culmination of this indictment. It's a 4-count indictment of events that led up to January 6th. We now join Fox News as part of their live coverage.
And so I think that
this is constitutional attorney Jonathan Turley.
Was this would play to Smith's weakness, that he tends to stretch evidence, stretch the law when he wants to go after someone. I'm still looking in this indictment for something that is really a sort of aha moment.
I'm going to get to Jesse in just one second, but let me just press you a little bit. So you said that we could guess who the co-conspirators are. Do you want? I'm actually not sure.
I would have to, if I'm guessing, Rudy Giuliani is one of the co-conspirators.
Do you want to speculate, or do you want to just wait?
He refers to attorneys that he enlisted. That would probably be John Eastman, Giuliani. Those types of people are likely to be the reference points here.
Got it. Jesse.
Well, the indictment reads like a transcript of an MSNBC show. First point, they said the defendant impaired the federal government from functioning. Isn't that literally the Republican Party platform to reduce the ability of the federal government from functioning? And then they say it's a crime to ask Pence not to certify? I wonder if Pence would agree that that was a crime. Apparently, the campaign managers told the defendant, Donald Trump, he had a 5 to 10% chance of winning these challenges, but he still fought on. The indictment said, how dare he? With 5 to 10% chance, I wonder what the guys in Vegas would say. You now have suspicious activity in Philadelphia, Detroit, and Arizona and Nevada. They're going to have to litigate suspicious election activity in all of those states.
Yeah, this is interesting because it does encompass multiple states. This is not just about Georgia. This is not just about what happened at the U.S. Capitol. This encompasses multiple states. Again, Trump has been summoned to appear at the federal courthouse at 4 p.m. Now, I keep seeing that the date and time changing on when Donald Trump is supposed to be there. The initial report said it was going to be Friday. Now it appears as if he's being summoned to the court tomorrow. We're going to continue to sort this out. I do see that the Department of Justice has put together a press conference setup. So I do expect we'll hear from the special counsel, Jack Smith, coming up. Stay with us here on WDBO.
The Joe Kelley Show on WDBO. Now, WDBO 107.3 FM and AM 580. Triple Team Traffic.
still have that crash. I'm looking at the video monitors. Sorry about that. Looking at the Turnpike northbound, just past 408. They still have the right lane shut down there from a multi-vehicle crash, and that has traffic backed up from before the Turkey Lake Service Plaza. Having tech issues? No worries. Visit Refresh Computers, Central Florida's budget computer store. Visit Refresh Computers in Longwood or at refreshcomputers.net. From the WDBO Triple Team Traffic Center, I'm Paul Cross.
This is WDBO 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's news and talk. Orange, Seminole, Osceola, and all of Central Florida. Join the conversation now by using the open mic in the WDBO app. Now, the Joe Kelley Show on Orlando's news and talk, WDBO.
If you're just joining us here on WDBO and the Joe Kelley Show, we're following breaking news. Donald Trump has been indicted on a 4-count indictment. We're told that the special counsel from the Department of Justice, Jack Smith, is going to be addressing this issue at 6 o'clock Eastern. It is now 6:07 Eastern, and it is not unusual to have a news conference start late, but we're watching this very, very closely. Meanwhile, Governor DeSantis has responded to reports of another grand jury indictment, saying, while I've seen the reports, I have not read the indictment. We need to enact reform so that Americans have the right to remove cases from Washington, D.C. to their home districts. That from Governor DeSantis just a short time ago. And we tune in now and we're watching very closely because at the Department of Justice, there at the courthouse, they have set up a news conference. They've got the Department of Justice podium with the American flags behind it, and they're preparing for Jack Smith, the special counsel, to step forward. In the meantime, we are listening in to ABC News live coverage of these 4 indictments that have just been handed down to Donald Trump.
Campaign, right? That's the first clip of video that you see in that re-election video that President Biden put out. And David, we know that the president feels very strongly that those who are responsible for this have to be held accountable. President Biden telling you that accountability is necessary no matter where it goes, even if it extends to the former president.
And we knew exactly what he meant when we asked that question of the president. In the meantime, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, took this step of naming a special counsel because the former president announced to the country that he was running for re-election. And that is when Merrick Garland said, this is underway. We have to get as far away from this as possible in naming a special counsel.
Yeah, and they thought that would put some distance, right, between these and prevent some of these political attacks. That has not happened, of course. This has now become the centerpiece, the cornerstone of Donald Trump's re-election campaign. In fact, he's already fundraising off of the news that we learned, just moments ago. And we know from the polling, the fact that none of these indictments, none of these charges so far have made a dent in Donald Trump's support. In fact, quite the opposite. He has a commanding, crushing lead in the polls. And it is just astounding when you take a step back and you think about the fact that the overwhelming frontrunner for the Republican nomination right now is someone who today is being accused of using his power to try and overturn the 2020 election, even though he knew allegedly that he had lost.
Let's just dive into this a bit further as we await Jack Smith. We're joined on the phone now by a reporter out on the campaign trail, Rachel Scott, who's been covering this for many months as well. And as you heard Mary allude to here moments ago, Rachel, Donald Trump has not only campaigned off of the first federal criminal indictment, now the second one as we sit here today, arguably much more serious than even the first. He has campaigned off of it, and he has built his lead, a much more commanding lead than just several weeks back. On the Republican side, the closest candidate behind him, Ron DeSantis, now trailing in many cases by up to 40 points or so.
David, make no mistake about it. Trump's legal defense is now the cornerstone of his campaign. I was just out on the campaign trail with him in Iowa and Pennsylvania. He was talking about railing against these indictments on the campaign trail to voters, and his rivals are hesitant to go after him. You mentioned Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. He's his biggest challenger so far. I asked him a few weeks ago if the former president bears any responsibility for what happened on January 6th. He said that Trump could have acted more forcefully that day, but he also believes that the Justice Department is being weaponized. Even Trump's own former Vice President Mike Pence, who called his actions reckless on January 6th, he told you that he felt like the former president not only put his life in danger, but his family's life in danger. He said that he hoped that Trump would not be indicted again. So what we are seeing out on the campaign trail is all of these candidates continue to walk a very fine line when it comes to the former president, because there's a clear concern here that they're going to turn away the very voters that they need in order to win the Republican nomination, David.
Rachel Scott with us here. Rachel, thank you. On this gulf now between Donald Trump and all of the other Republican candidates, leading Ron DeSantis by about 37 points on the Republican side. And again, just today, the New York Times Siena poll that looked at the entire general election matchup, if it were held today between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, a dead heat in this country, 43-43, obviously with full knowledge of the first federal criminal indictment. These numbers obviously don't take into account the news as it's unfolding here today. And also, a big part of this story in the New York Times reporting today are the number of people who are disinterested in both candidates and who did not want to say they would really vote for either one. A deep dive goes into their feelings about both of these candidates and how strongly they feel. But again, right now in this country, as you see, this is not Jack Smith. We've been given a 2-minute warning, which is something they often do. They check the microphone and let reporters know. Let's bring in Aaron Katursky really quickly, who's pouring through the indictment as well. This is a relationship that we have reported on in great detail here on World News Tonight, that between the former president and Mike Pence, and there's a point in the indictment where it's clear that the former president has told Mike Pence, "You're too honest."
It's a stunning moment when former President Trump called the vice president and berated him, David, the indictment says, because he learned that Pence had opposed a lawsuit seeking a judicial decision that at the certification, the vice president had the authority to reject what was going on Capitol Hill. Pence, we know, has said he did not have that authority, disagreed with President Trump, was berated for it, the special counsel says. Trump telling him, "You're too honest." And while this is not called out for a specific criminal charge, that it is even part of the whole tally of criminal charges is really quite stunning. And of course, we know the calls that echoed here on Capitol Hill on January 6th, hang Mike Pence.
Aaron Katursky live in Washington for us, our investigative reporter. Aaron, thank you. We do have breaking news coming in right now as we await Jack Smith, the special counsel. ABC News has just learned that former President Trump's case has been assigned now to D.C. District Judge Tanya Chutkan. According to the court docket, Chutkan is an appointee of former President Obama. She has previously been profiled for handing out some of the most severe sentences for rioters involved in the January 6th assault on the Capitol. She also previously rejected an effort by Donald Trump to try to block the release of documents to the House committee investigating the January 6th Capitol riot. This is interesting, and I had asked Dan before we came on the air today how judges are selected. We know it's at random. In some cases, they're selected by a wheel, but we believe there's some sort of automated system that selects these judges.
Correct. So all of the judges in the D.C. circuit, and I think there are about 13 full-time, and then there are a bunch who are senior judges. Yeah. Can go into the effectively what's a random wheel. And they get picked randomly in terms of who the judge becomes. We talked about this before. There are 4 of the 13 were nominated by Republicans, 9 nominated by Democrats. Now, the judge's role here becomes critical in timing.
We'll talk more about the judge in just a moment. First, Jack Smith, the special counsel in this case. This is the second time now coming before the American people. Let's listen.
Good evening. Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to disenfranchise voters, and conspiring and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding. The indictment was issued by a grand jury of citizens here in the District of Columbia, and it sets forth the crimes charged in detail. I encourage everyone to read it in full. The attack on our nation's capital on January 6th, 2021 was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election. The men and women of law enforcement who defended the U.S. Capitol on January 6th are heroes. They are patriots and they are the very best of us. They did not just defend a building or the people sheltering in it. They put their lives on the line to defend who we are as a country and as a people. They defended the very institutions and principles that define the United States. Since the attack on our Capitol, the Department of Justice has remained committed to ensuring accountability for those criminally responsible for what happened that day. This case is brought consistent with that commitment, and our investigation of other individuals continues. In this case, my office will seek a speedy trial so that our evidence can be tested in court and judged by a jury of citizens. In the meantime, I must emphasize that the indictment is only an allegation and that the defendant must be presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. I would like to thank the members of the Federal Bureau of Investigation who are working on this investigation with my office, as well as the many career prosecutors and law enforcement agents from around the country who have worked on previous January 6th investigations. These women and men are public servants of the very highest order, and it is a privilege to work alongside them. Thank you.
We knew it would be a short comment there from Jack Smith, the DOJ Special Counsel Jack Smith, not taking any questions. A couple questions there shouted at him at the end, but he is not answering any questions, and he's now returning back into his office or wherever it is he's going. My name is Joe Kelley. You can join us now at 844-580-WDBO. It's 844-580-9326. You can use the open mic in the WDBO app with your reaction to President Biden now being indicted again, and these being, of course, the most serious charges that he is facing. We will reset. We'll check updated traffic for you coming up in a few minutes as well, and get your calls and comments coming up straight ahead at 844-580-WDBO, or use the open mic in the WDBO app.
The Joe Kelley Show on WDBO. Now, the three big things you need to know.
3. Today is National Night Out across America. The annual event, now in its 40th year, looks to broaden the relationship between local police and the communities they serve. Many events set to take place will feature games, music, and food. 2. The NFL and Nickelodeon will make Super Bowl history next year. The popular family and kids cable network will host the first ever alternate telecast of the Super Bowl on February 11th. The broadcast will be filled with special on-field graphics and guest reporters aimed at children and families. 1. Former President Trump is expected to be arraigned Thursday following his indictment for election interference that culminated with the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot. Trump was charged with 4 federal counts, including conspiracy to defraud the U.S., conspiracy against the right to vote. An Obama-appointed judge has been assigned the case.
The Joe Kelley Show on WDBO. Talk and discussion on the latest breaking national news.
Crude oil prices continue to fall.
Local news.
You're not going to have Disney have its own government in Central Florida.
And stories that matter to you. Use the open mic in the WDBO app and let your voice be heard on the Joe Kelley Show.
I got to correct myself. Evidently, I said Biden when it comes to indictments. I said that Biden had been indicted. Biden has not been indicted. Donald Trump has been indicted. Please forgive me for the error. For what it's worth, I've been awake longer than I normally am on most days, and I've been on the radio longer than I am on most days. I've been on the radio effectively since 9 o'clock this morning, and perhaps I'm a little fatigued now that I think about it and all. All right, 844-580-WDBO. It's 844-580-9326. You can use the open mic in the WDBO app. I just got this open mic, and this open mic just blows my mind. Take a listen.
Hey, Joe, why we got to keep beating this Donald Trump story over and over and over? You guys already announced it. All right, enough of it. Move on. I mean, belating, for the Bidens, we don't spend this much amount of time on the Bidens. The media don't. You're part of the media. Cut it out. Drop the topic.
Drop the topic. Literally, the words from the special counsel's mouth are still lingering in the air. He's barely finished his comments. Donald Trump hasn't even responded yet. Donald Trump hasn't appeared in court yet. And you want to drop the topic? Drop the topic? I mean, that is insane. You may not like the news that is coming out. You may not even believe the news that is coming out. But to suggest that a news outlet not talk about it is ludicrous. It is insane to suggest we drop the topic. It is going to be a while before we stop talking about Donald Trump. And believe me, Donald Trump wants us talking about Donald Trump. And as you heard, and it's true, Donald Trump has been raising all kinds of money based upon his legal woes.
Steve from Sanford.
Steve!
Once again, the Department of Injustice, because Biden has come up with more dirt on him, decided to take another swipe at Trump. Well, in the end, it's all going to backfire.
Yeah, and ultimately time will tell.
I just want to remind everybody who has short memories that in 2016, before the election even started, Trump was laying down the breadcrumbs to claim fraud if he lost to Hillary. Remember, he was already claiming that if he lost to Hillary, it would be due to fraud before the election even started. This guy is a grifter. He is a liar. He is a cheater. Hopefully soon to be a prisoner.
Wow. All right. Join me now, 844-580-WDBO. Steve is checking in from Sanford. Hey, Steve, you're on WDBO. Welcome.
No, Joe, I just heard my open mic, and I will take the bold step of renaming the Unjustice Department, the Department of Injustice.
Right, of injustice.
Because this is totally ridiculous, totally bogus. You know, you got a news cycle with Biden, so much dirt coming out. You got, hang on,
Steve. But how do you know that? How are you so certain? How are you so confident that all of this is bogus? That there's no there? Now, I ask you that knowing full well that the Russian hoax, collusion hoax, was all bogus. That a lot of these indictments that Donald Trump has been facing are, if you will, trumped up. But I mean, how are you so confident that Donald Trump, in fact, did not, in some way, shape, or another, muck with the election results of 2020?
Well, you know, I can, in my gut, I feel that he hasn't. He has the best interest of this country at heart, and I just know you can feel it. Everybody, all your listeners out there can feel that Joe Biden does not have the interest of this country in heart. He has his own interest. It's become self-service.
Wholeheartly agree with you on that one, Steve. It's a different topic, but yes, I think Joe Biden is a danger to our country, if for no other reason, because of his failing cognitive skills. I agree with you on that one.
Yeah, you're right, exactly. I mean, Joe Biden's even admitted he took bribes. We have it on tape.
Well, you're talking about when he said that they're going to have to pay $1 billion to or they're not going to get the $1 billion unless they fire the prosecutor, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, what better evidence? That's like the golden evidence. It's like the golden calf on there.
Right, but to say that Joe Biden should be in court, that Joe Biden should at some point be facing charges, doesn't mean that Donald Trump is innocent.
No, I agree, and I'm sure he's not 100% innocent. I am sure he's not. But, there again, like I said, I don't really feel in my gut that he's done anything to damage this country.
I will. Thank you, Steve, so much.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. Thank you for listening. And I'll tell you that the indictment is available to read. You can see the indictment now at WDBO.com if you want to be able to see that, or in the WDBO app. I think it's going to be really important for everybody to read the indictment. Regrettably, I have not. I've been on the radio the whole time, so I have not read the indictment, and thus I'm not going to be an expert on it even after I read it, but I'm not even casually aware of what's in the indictment because I haven't had a chance yet to read it. Let's go to Bob in Windermere. You're on WDBO. Hi, Bob.
How you doing this evening? Listen, I am almost up to the top of my head with trying to process. Donald Trump could be the kingmaker by endorsing someone else. Instead, he wants to play the role of the court jester and allow all this stuff to go on around him for no reason whatsoever. They're going to find him guilty of something. What that is, I don't know. Whether it's trumped up, I don't know. Whether the election was rigged, I don't know. But instead of unifying the party and anointing someone as the Don of the party and unifying everybody and rallying support for anybody else, he chooses to raise money and do his stuff. And at the end of the day, he can't beat Joe Biden.
Bob, thank you so much, man. I agree. I appreciate your candor. I agree with you. There's a whole lot that we just don't know about this and that we perhaps aren't going to know until there's a trial. My name is Joe Kelley. You can join me at 844-580-WDBO or use the open mic in the WDBO app. Our live coverage continues straight ahead.
This is WDBO 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's news and talk. In-depth segments on topics that matter to Orange, Seminole, Osceola, and all of Central Florida. The Joe Kelley Show on WDBO.
I love your show every night. You're doing great, bud.
If you're just joining us here on the Joe Kelley Show on WDBO, we are following breaking news as President Donald Trump has been indicted again. Special counsel Jack Smith unsealed a 4-count indictment against President Trump. The president has been ordered, and again, I've seen the time has varied on this, but he's been ordered evidently to the courthouse tomorrow at 4 p.m., at which point he'll be arrested, and then he's going to be facing this 4-count indictment. We've got a pretty deep bench of resources that we can utilize here for coverage out of Washington, D.C. We were listening a little bit earlier to ABC News coverage. I want to get the reaction, the take from Brett Baer from Fox News and his special report.
Jack Smith, a short statement there on the 4 counts. Again, the 45th president of the United States indicted for a 3rd time on 4 counts: conspiracy to defraud the U.S., conspiracy to obstruct official proceeding, obstruction of official proceeding, conspiracy against rights. Back with Andy and Jonathan. Jonathan, there was not a lot of substance there as far as anything else. We do know there are 6 co-conspirators listed in this indictment. Your thoughts on what he said and how he said it?
I think he established that this is the criminalization of disinformation. That's what he was referring to. I think he's going to have a hard time with that. I mean, this looks like basically a complaint that follows Oscar Wilde's rule that the best way to be rid of temptation is to yield to it. I mean, it does not appear that this was motivated by new evidence. And in order to get a conviction, he will have to use material that, in my view, is clearly protected by the First Amendment. He's allowed to follow bad advice. I was doing part of the coverage on that day. I criticized the speech when Trump was giving it. I disagreed with what he said about Pence. That doesn't mean that he's a criminal for following that advice or taking that view. And more importantly, you have Democrats that challenge the certification of Republican presidents. Were they also engaged in a criminal conduct when they did that? I think this is going to face very severe scrutiny. The question is whether the Trump campaign can get this into the appellate courts quickly, where I think Smith's going to have a hard time.
Andy, about timelines, we don't know this timeline specifically. We know the judge has been appointed, but you guys both say that the other documents case seems more troublesome for the Trump campaign, the Trump team, and the former president. And yet we have other legal hurdles to go in Georgia and in New York. Your thoughts on the timeline and what you heard from the special counsel?
Well, just to start with what I heard, Brett, that was one of the most demagogic presentations I've ever seen in a high-profile criminal case. Anyone who listened to that, any normal person reacting to that, would assume that Trump was alleged to have carried out the Capitol riot. The entire presentation that he made was not about what the core charges in his case are. It was about the Capitol riot and the security personnel who were injured in the Capitol riot and who had to fight to defend the Capitol riot. And then you turn to his indictment, he's not charged with the Capitol riot. So if that is what he has to resort to
in order to sell his case to the public, I think that's very telling in terms of how compelling his case is. As far as the timeline is concerned, I think he's going to have, if it's a good judge, we'll have to see, he'll have a very hard time getting this case to trial, because having decided to already indict him on the Mar-a-Lago case, he's not in a good position to go to court and say, as he said in his remarks, that he wants a speedy trial and he wants to get this case to trial. Now, I know for political reasons they'd love to have the Capitol riot, which he's underscoring, in front of the voters in the run-up to the election. But as a legal matter, by bringing the first case first, he's now crimped the amount of time that Trump has to prepare for what looks like it's going to be a legally complex trial. So I think he has a very hard time, if you get a good judge, getting this case to trial.
Gentlemen, thank you. Stand by if you would. We need a whiteboard for all of this. It is like planes going into LaGuardia with this legal situation. But the person who's dealing with this case joins us now. John Lauro is former President Trump's lead attorney on this specific case. He joins us with his first public reaction. John, thanks for being here. You heard what the special counsel said. You've read the indictment. Your client's been talking about it quite a bit today on Truth Social. Your thoughts on this?
It's a terribly tragic day that we find ourselves in, where political speech now has been criminalized, where an existing Justice Department, Merrick Garland, has a boss. His name is Joe Biden, and Joe Biden's running against Donald Trump and losing currently. And now we have that Justice Department indicting President Trump for actions that he took as the chief executive of the United States with respect to public policy matters. So now we have the criminalization and the weaponization of public policy and political speech by one political party over another. And it's not surprising when it comes. It comes on the heels of unbelievable allegations against Mr. Biden and his son, as well as the fact that Donald Trump is leading in the polls right now. And now we have what essentially is a regurgitation of the allegations in the January 6th report, which was highly political. It really reads no differently. So it's really an astounding document, because for the first time in American history, a former president is being prosecuted by a political opponent who wields the power of the criminal justice system for what he believed in and the policies and the political speech that he carried out as president. This is unprecedented. It affects not just Donald Trump, it affects every American who now realizes that the First Amendment is under assault. It's under attack by the Biden administration. We now have a political incumbent who is attacking Americans for their beliefs, attacking Americans for their speech, and attacking Americans for their politics. This has never happened in the history of our country, and it's playing out right now.
Yeah. John, let me read from the indictment, and you can respond to this specifically. It says, the defendant lost the 2020 presidential election. Despite having lost, the defendant was determined to remain in power. So for more than 2 months following the election day, November 3rd, 2020, the defendant spread lies that there had been outcome determinative fraud in the election and that he had actually won. These claims were false, and the defendant knew that they were false. It created an intense national atmosphere of mistrust and anger and eroded public faith in the administration of the election.
I would like them to try to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump believed that these allegations were false. What did he see in real time? He saw changes in election procedure in the middle of the game being carried out by executive level people at the state level, election officials, but not the state legislatures. He had an advice of counsel, a very detailed memorandum from a constitutional expert who said, Mr. President, these states are complaining about what happened. You, as the executive, have the ability to ask Vice President Pence to pause the vote on January 6th, have these states audit and recertify, and that way we know ultimately who won the election. And that's the only thing that President Trump suggested. There's nothing unlawful about that. He was entitled to do that as the chief executive officer carrying out the laws, and nothing about that was obstructive. It was quite interesting that Mr. Smith talked about the violence on Capitol Hill. He's not being charged with that. There's no allegation that President Trump incited any violence or did anything to cause any violence. Just the opposite. He's being indicted for free speech. He's being indicted for objecting to the way that the 2020 election was carried out. And any American that takes that view should be equally concerned, are they next? Because the reality is that if a president can be indicted for free speech, then anybody can be indicted. So when this case goes to trial, we're going to be representing not just President Trump, but every single American that believes in the First Amendment and believes in your ability to redress and bring grievances to Congress. And that's exactly what people were doing. You had these alternate electors that said to the Congress.
You're listening to John Lauro. John Lauro is an attorney representing Donald Trump. Again, if you're just joining us here on WDBO, the Joe Kelley Show, Donald Trump has been charged with 4 counts as an indictment has been unsealed in the special counsel case. Special counsel Jack Smith announcing that just a short time ago, about a half an hour ago. We will continue our special live coverage coming up straight ahead right here on WDBO.
The Joe Kelley Show on WDBO. The Joe Kelley Show on WDBO. News, weather, traffic, all the things you want on your drive home. Plus, Joe Kelley being, well, Joe Kelley. Now, the Joe Kelley Show on Orlando's News and Talk, WDBO.
If you're just joining us here on WDBO, we are following breaking news. Donald Trump has been charged in 4 counts with the election indictment in the special counsel case. And I wanted to go back to Bret Baier. Bret Baier just recently interviewed the president about whether or not the president knew that he lost the election. And a lot of this seems to hinge upon whether or not Donald Trump knew that he was lying about losing the election, or if Donald Trump thought that he actually did lose the election. And now, I don't know how in the world in a court you're going to be able to prove whether or not Donald Trump knew, because people who lie, and if Donald Trump lied about this, people who lie oftentimes are so convincing at it that they convince themselves. I have long believed that Bill Clinton thought he was telling the truth when he said, I did not have sex with that girl, Miss Lewinsky. I believe that Bill Clinton had convinced himself that was the truth. And similarly, if he is lying, and I'm not saying that he is, but if Donald Trump is lying, it is possible that he convinced himself that he, in fact, did lose the election as a means of saving face, of not hurting his own feelings. But I wanted to tune back in here to Bret Baier as Bret Baier is about to go back to an earlier interview that he had with Donald Trump.
To your point about what he believed, I talked to the former president a few weeks ago at his place in New Jersey about other things, but the 2020 election came up. Here's a piece of that. You lost the 2020 election.
Brett, you take a look at all of the stuffed ballots. You take a look at all of the things, including things like the 51 intelligence agents.
There were recounts in all of the swing states. There was not significant widespread
We're trying to get recounts, real recounts, not just numbers of votes
widespread
cast.
corruption. There was not a sense of that. There were lawsuits, more than 50 of them, by your lawyers, some in front of judges that you appointed.
Look at Wisconsin.
That came out with no evidence.
Wisconsin has practically admitted it was rigged. Other states are doing the same right now.
Clearly, Donald Trump thinks that he won that election. Ultimately, time will tell. Keep your radios right here on WDBO. This is a story that we will continue to follow through its conclusion.